I'm Maria Titizian.
And I'm Rubina Margosian, and this is the Week in Review.
Every week, we bring you the stories shaping Armenia and the region.
From politics and policy to social issues and conflict, we break down the news and what it means for you.
This week in the news, the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan hold a high-level meeting in Abu Dhabi. 3 Armenian parliamentarians are stripped of their immunity and face criminal charges. 7 members of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation are detained in terrorism-related investigations. These stories and more in our weekly roundup of the news.
Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev met in Abu Dhabi on July 10. Meetings were held both in one-on-one and extended formats involving respective delegations. The Armenian delegation included Deputy Prime Minister Meher Grigoryan, Security Council Secretary Armen Grigoryan, Foreign Minister Arat Mirzoyan, and Deputy Parliament Speaker Ruben Rubinyan, who is also Armenia's envoy in talks on normalization with Turkey. The Azerbaijani delegation included Deputy Prime Minister Shahin Mustafayev, Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov, Aliyev's Foreign Policy Advisor Hikmet Hajiev, and Aliyev envoy Echin Amirbayov. The meetings concluded with identical press releases. Yerevan and Baku confirmed that bilateral negotiations represent the most efficient format to address all issues concerning the normalization process, and on this basis, it was agreed to continue such result-oriented dialogue. The leaders took stock of the progress in border delimitation and instructed the respective state commissions to continue practical work in that regard. The sides also agreed to continue confidence-building measures between the two countries.
Last year, Armenia and Azerbaijan delimited a 12.7-kilometer section of the border in the Davush region, and border guards of each country were deployed to man the border, replacing the military. Since then, it appeared that the process had been stalled as no further delimitation or demarcation of the state border had taken place. 2 days before the Abu Dhabi meeting, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio had stated during a cabinet meeting in the White House that Washington hopes that pretty soon a peace deal will be signed between Armenia and Azerbaijan. When asked why Rubio is hopeful, a State Department spokesperson said it was important enough, of course, for him to mention, and Secretary Rubio mentioned it for a reason. This was the response from the spokesperson. While Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Moscow supports the talks and suggested that the signing of a peace treaty will become an important factor that will allow adding predictability, stability, and peace to the region. A European Union spokesperson said Brussels welcomes the meeting and strongly supports the normalization process between the two countries. As the talks were underway, Armenia's Deputy Foreign Minister Mnatsagan Safarian told reporters, well, specifically a reporter at Azadutyun, that Yerevan is not opposed to delegating responsibility of managing the functions of the Sunik route, the so-called Zangezur corridor, to an international organization, provided Armenia's sovereignty, national jurisdiction, and the principle of reciprocity are maintained. Now, this all came about after a July 1 piece by Olesya Vartanyan for the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where she revealed that, according to her sources, Washington has proposed a U.S. business participation as a stabilizing force in the route via, the southern part of Armenia. And this is what Baku calls, as we said earlier, the Zangezur corridor, in which it sees an unobstructed route to its Nakhichevan exclave and Turkey via Armenian territory. Well, following Safarian's remarks, and we all know what happened after the Vartanyan piece was published, right? Rubina and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Every media in the country and every expert, every talking head was saying, Armenia has already ceded, the corridor, the route to an American company. And I think that's what Mnatsagan Safarian was trying to say, right?
Yes,
but again, it was misconstrued.
Yes, and he repeated it so many times, trying to be very correct about it, saying Armenia is technically not opposed to delegating some of the management or some functions to a third-party international organization. Doesn't even say America, but because the timing was really delicate, this was happening right before the meeting with Aliyev in Abu Dhabi. So it was just like, wildfire in social media and across media organizations as well.
It didn't matter, yeah. Well, following his remarks, Armenia's foreign ministry asked media outlets not to distort his words, as some had reported, as we said, that Armenia is ready to hand over control of the route to the United States. It reiterated that the process must take place And they keep saying this, right, over and over again: the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and jurisdiction of the Republic of Armenia.
Well, Armenia's parliament voted this week to strip 3 parliament deputies from the opposition Armenia alliance of their parliamentary immunity based on the Prosecutor General's petition to initiate criminal proceedings against them. One is former Defense Minister Seyran Ohanyan. The second is a former Minister of Environment, Artsvik Minasyan. Neither attended the sessions due to health reasons. Meanwhile, the 2 opposition factions boycotted the sessions. Ohanyan, who served as Defense Minister under Ser Sargsyan, is accused of concealing property in his asset declarations over a number of years. The property in question is located on the shore of Lake Sevan, which was allegedly illicitly obtained. Minasyan is accused of failing to take measures against these illegal activities. This is when he was Minister of Environment, and Sevan is a national park, and no one can legally, technically own property, land there. Well, both were formally charged on July 8. Neither accepted the charges and dismissed them as politically motivated. The third deputy, Artur Sargsyan, faces charges related to preparing terrorism and attempting to seize power as part of the alleged conspiracy led by Archbishop Bagrat Galestanian of Tavush, who was detained on June 25. The parliament also voted to authorize Sargsyan's detention, with the Prosecutor General citing flight risk as one of the grounds.
In related news, Armenia's investigative committee has initiated criminal proceedings related to terrorism and illegal circulation of firearms, ammunition, and related materials. Law enforcement discovered remote-controlled electronic detonators, grenades, grenade detonators, explosives, and other devices. 7 individuals have been arrested in connection with the case, and 1 person is facing formal criminal charges under preparation of terrorism. The others are still in pretrial detention and have not been officially charged. The arrested are affiliated with the opposition Armenian Revolutionary Federation party. A lot of them come from their youth wing, in fact. Among them is the son of Parliament Deputy Geram Manukyan, who attributed the arrest by the government's fears and labeled the move as part of repressions. Lawyers said law enforcement will attempt to link the case to that of Bagrat Galestanian, who's the former archbishop, who is charged with conspiracy to terrorism. In a statement, Armenia's human rights ombudsperson, Anahit Manasyan, warned against the dangerous trends of not upholding the presumption of innocence. She expressed concern that law enforcement agencies and their representatives with disregard for the presumption of innocence, when they are officially obligated not simply to justify individuals' guilt, but to conduct independent, objective, and impartial investigations. The ARF insisted that no illegal items were found or seized at any of the detainees' homes and accused Pashinyan's government of political persecution and information attacks, or what they called information attacks. The investigative committee countered that the seized items included a hand grenade and 2 electronic detonators. Following the searches, Hasmik Hagopian, a parliament deputy from the ruling civil contract, called for the shutting down of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation and classifying it as a terrorist organization. She cited First President Levon Ter-Bedrosyan's 1994 decree that suspended ARF activities for alleged political assassinations, terrorist planning, drug trafficking, and creating secret intelligence services. It was later revoked by President Robert Kocharian when he came to power in 1998.
And on July 8, Armenian law enforcement conducted operations lasting over 5 hours at the electric networks of Armenia, seizing documents. They also searched the home of the company board chairman, Narek Karapetyan, who is the nephew of jailed Russian-Armenian billionaire Samvel Karapetyan. The investigative committee said urgent investigative action was being carried out within the framework of criminal proceedings initiated at the main Department of Investigation of Economic Crimes and Smuggling and the Yerevan City Investigative Department. The week prior, Parliament passed legislative amendments aimed at nationalizing the electric networks of Armenia, the operator of the national power grid. On the same day, Armenia's investigative committee launched a criminal investigation into a major financial crime case involving multiple companies. The investigation centered on allegations of extensive money laundering, embezzlement, and large-scale tax evasion. 51 separate addresses were were being searched simultaneously, they were reportedly connected to Karapetyan's Tashir group. And on July 10, it emerged that the authorities were seeking the seizure of the Yerevan Circus, another company owned by Karapetyan. The state demands confiscation of its properties, including the circus building, which was constructed after the Soviet-era structure was demolished. This was in 2012. The new building stands complete externally, but construction work is not fully finished. The state is seeking to annul multiple contracts from 2006 and 2011, alienation, investment, and mortgage agreements, suggesting these contracts may be violated or their terms not fulfilled. And similarly, on July 11, the director of Tashir Pizza, a chain of restaurants also owned by Karapetyan, was arrested for large-scale tax evasion. Meanwhile, Karapetyan has filed multiple defamation lawsuits against several high-ranking government officials and pro-government public figures, seeking public retraction and 9 million Armenian drams. This is approximately $23,000 in damages from each one. They include Pashinyan's press secretary, Pashinyan's deputy chief of staff, the parliament members Haykon Joyan and Arsen Torosyan, and political commentator Harutun Mkirchyan. The lawsuits target various remarks and social media posts by these individuals. And separately, Pashinyan has filed his first ever lawsuit against a media outlet, suing Hrabarak newspaper for 1 million drams, this is $2,500, over an article that made unsubstantiated allegations about his personal conduct, including rumors about inappropriate behavior with his spokesperson in his office. The newspaper justified publishing these claims by citing Pashinyan's own public questioning of the Armenian Catholicos, arguing they had similar rights to make such allegations. So the newspaper is just making fun of Pashinyan for his allegations.
Well, speaking of his allegations in the church, on July 8, the World Council of Churches released a statement expressing its deep concern regarding recent developments in Armenia involving the Armenian Apostolic Church, including reported law enforcement actions at the Mother See of Holy Etchmiadzin and the detention of senior clergy. The Secretary General of the Council said, quote, reports of force being used within sacred spaces and the detention of clergy raise significant concerns about the protection of religious freedom, the sanctity of worship, and the autonomy of religious institutions. Well, U.S. Congressman Brad Sherman from California, who is vice chair of the Armenia Caucus, also expressed deep concern about the recent arrests of what he called Armenian dissidents, including Mr. Samvel Karapetyan and clergy of the Armenian Church. He conveyed his concerns to Armenia's ambassador to the U.S., Lilit Makunts, to which Arsen Torosyan, a member of parliament from the Civil Contract Party and a member of the Armenia-U.S. Parliamentary Friendship Group, replied to Brad Sherman, saying the following: I would like you to know that clergy that you are mentioning, he said, that have been arrested for an attempted coup d'etat by planning terror attacks and killings of civilians, and Samvel Karapetyan, who is also a Russian citizen and tycoon, is charged with attempting to distort the constitutional order of Armenia. He said, adding, we are always ready to provide you and the Armenian Caucus of the U.S. Congress credible information on what's happening in our country, since we highly appreciate our collaboration. So that was interesting. And then other people got involved in this discussion that Arsen Torosyan had publicly, issued this statement to Brad Sherman. It's been interesting to follow social media these days. Well, the EU delegation in Armenia responded to a media inquiry that Brussels is, quote, following the developments around the Armenian Apostolic Church and authorities. The statement said it is the internal affair of Armenia, and it is up to the Armenian authorities to investigate the allegations. Well, Catholicos Aram I of Cilicia, who was based in Antelias, Lebanon, lamented the unhealthy and anti-national atmosphere in the homeland. He said he is committed to consulting with Catholicos Karakin II, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, and others to find solutions to bring Armenia out of the current situation. On July 9, Armenia's investigative committee denied media reports about planned actions at the church headquarters in Etchmiadzin. A church spokesperson had earlier claimed that Armenian law enforcement was allegedly planning to brutally storm the Mother See. Prime Minister Pashinyan had warned in a social media post that no area of Etchmiadzin or Vagar Shabbat, the town where the Mother See is located, is off limits to law enforcement activities.
A little bit about foreign relations. During his visit to Abu Dhabi, Pashinyan held a separate meeting with Emirati President bin Zayed to discuss bilateral relations. Foreign Minister Mirzoyan met with his Emirati counterpart to discuss economic cooperation and investments. Earlier, Mirzoyan had also spoken with his Jordanian counterpart to discuss planned high-level contacts, economic cooperation, and tourism. This week, Armenia's Defense Minister Suren Papikian spoke with his Iranian counterpart to discuss bilateral cooperation, international and regional security topics. And on July 8, Armenia and the EU held their 6th Partnership Committee meeting in Brussels. Key discussions covered the implementation of a €270 million resilience and growth plan supporting Armenia's integration with the EU sectors, progress and democratic reforms and rule of law, and expanding cooperation in areas like digital transformation and energy security.
On July 7, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galuzin and Armenia's ambassador to Russia, Gurgen Arsenyan, held a meeting to discuss issues on their bilateral and regional agenda. Galuzin conveyed Moscow's message on the necessity of maintaining a constructive informational background around Russia. This is a quote, essentially telling Armenia that it expects favorable media coverage and an end to criticism of Russian TV channels, which we've been hearing about for months. Galuzin also proposed conducting another round of consultations. The previous week, Armenia's Television and Radio Commission had accused Russian state-run TV channels broadcasting in Armenia of spreading offensive statements, distorted assessments, and emotional and aggressive characterizations directed at Armenian state institutions and citizens. The Commission said it is considering stopping the rebroadcast of Russian channels, stating that public broadcasting should not serve foreign political agendas. Armenia's Parliament Speaker Alen Simonyan had called for an end to Russian broadcasts for insulting Armenian leadership, questioning Armenia's sovereignty, calling for protests against the government, and interfering in Armenia's internal affairs.
And on July 8 as well, Armenia's defense ministry reported that servicemen were injured by a live mortar fire, and this was during training. And I still don't understand why there was live fire during training. It did not provide any details, including the number of wounded soldiers. However, a follow-up communication from the ministry confirmed that none of the injuries were life-threatening.
Well, as always, we do a quick recap of the articles we published this week, and today we published Sosi Tatikian's next article, and it's called Conditioning Peace on Constitutional Change, Impact on Armenia's Sovereignty and Identity. We know that Azerbaijan, has been demanding that Armenia amend its constitution as a condition for peace. Tatikian argues that this raises serious concerns over sovereignty, governance, and even national identity. She explores the strategic, legal, symbolic implications of constitutional change under external pressure and asymmetric diplomacy. But she does also mention that, the talks of amending the constitution have been in the public discourse since Pashinyan came to power, since 2020 and 2022. But now, of course, as we know, Baku is demanding that the preamble be removed because it has references to Nagorno-Karabakh. Anyway, it's a very, as always with Tatikian, a very in-depth, incisive piece.
And most interestingly for me in this piece were the parts where she's comparing similar cases,
Right.
post-World War II Germany and other countries, and what happened and what was the circumstances, how Azerbaijan sometimes references them,
Right.
but how they don't really fit the bill in this case well. In another article titled How U.S. Involvement in the Iran-Israel War Can Impact Armenia, two new contributors this time. Well, they discuss the possibility that if Iran-Israel conflict intensifies further with U.S. involvement, Armenia faces mounting security, economic, and diplomatic risks. The analysis explores how regional instability, energy disruption, and great power pressures are reshaping Armenia's strategic landscape and testing its delicate foreign policy balance.
And the next one is probably one of the most exhaustive and comprehensive pieces about this new AI data center that's set to open in Armenia. It's by Ani Toroyan, and it's called Bringing AI Home, What a $500 Million Data Center Could Mean for Armenia. And just for those who don't know, the 5 people who don't know about it, the data center is backed by NVIDIA, Firebird, Team Telecom, and the Armenian government. So Toroyan, she unpacks what could this really mean for the country's tech ecosystem, energy infrastructure, because these data centers require a lot of energy, a lot of water, and future as a regional hub for AI innovation. So a very interesting read.
And another article from Surge to Stability, Armenia's Economic Snapshot. It's by Sandra Sadek. Again, a first-time contribution to EVN Report. She says, as Armenia's rapid economic growth slows, the government's ambitious reform agenda aimed at accelerating economic growth and attracting investment faces ongoing challenges. Despite notable investments, progress remains uneven across sectors like health, education, and agriculture. And she's referencing the World Bank report on this.
And again, another piece by first-time contributor Gibran Caroline Boyce. It's called The Silence That Followed the Sirens, Iranian Armenians and the 12-Day War. And, as we all know, as Armenians, it seems wherever we are, we're always, if not in Armenia, in somebody else's battle, if you will, or conflict. So when Israeli and U.S. airstrikes hit Iran, Armenians on both sides of the border, in Tehran and Yerevan and throughout the countries, were thrust into fear and uncertainty because we do have a large Armenian community, not only in Tehran, but in other parts of Iran. So she follows the story of one family's experience and reveals how war reverberates across borders, communities, and generations. It's a really well-written piece.
And July 5, last Saturday, was Constitution Day, and on the occasion we published an extra article this week. Armenia's perpetual search for a fitting constitution. It's a piece by Hovannes Nazaretian, and it's an in-depth piece, typically, which chronicles Armenia's constitutional history since independence, outlining the country's 3 constitutional referendums to date, and detailing the current progress of drafting a new constitution. By laying out everything we know so far.
Right. And 2 podcasts we published this week. Okay, so I don't know which one to start with, but let's start with examining the context, Armenia, the 12-Day War and Strategic Ambiguity. As always, Nexus Kopalian does a monthly security report called EVN Security Report, and then he and I sit down and we do a conversation, a podcast, trying to explain sometimes the dense academic language that he uses.
Trying to examine the context.
Yeah, that's why we're examining the context. So following the 12-day Israel-Iran war and the U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, Armenia, obviously, as we all know, this was probably the worst scenario that we could have had for ourselves. So it's facing new geopolitical risks. So he helps us look at the implications for Yerevan's foreign policy. We explore the limits of neutrality because it's not only about being neutral. And he says we need to employ strategic ambiguity. So how we can navigate rising regional volatility by utilizing this technique, because, U.S. is a strategic partner. Without Iran, Armenia would suffocate because it's only one of 2 borders that we have open. So it was a very interesting conversation.
And an exciting new podcast. It's called Up Close and Personal. It's a format we've had for several years, but never in as a podcast.
Right.
It's something we started doing during our media festivals, where we would have in-depth conversations with a person we know in general as a public figure or through their work, but we never understand where they're coming from, who they are, what were their experiences,
what shaped them.
So we've decided to bring this to our podcast room now and continue with it.
And I'll tell you, I had so much fun with this particular guest, Artur Babian. For those who don't know Artur Babian, he we've known Artur for years, right, Rubina? And he's the guy that we call every time there's an emergency or some tech issue, or we've been hacked, or the website is down, or I don't know.
A million times. All times of the day.
And he's perpetually, what is the word I'm looking for? He's never pessimistic. He always has a good outlook, even when things are really bad, and I want to say Artur, and he goes, yeah, it's okay, and I really want to shake him by the shoulder. So I got to reveal a lot of these layers that we didn't know about Artur, and it was a fun podcast, and I would really recommend spending an hour,
getting to know Artur Babian, who a lot of people know but don't
really
know.
Yeah. So that's the kind of week we had here in Armenia. Thank you for listening. Have a safe and peaceful weekend, and we will be back again next week.